when do you date the Gnostic myths?
I think they go way back and evolved from Judaism, though with some cross-pollination from other sources, as you see in the Nag Hammadi text. There's already Zoroastrian and Platonic elements, but I think Margaret Barker is right in that it comes from Judaism.
Well, it may come from Judaism, but Gnostic scholars today, of course, when you and I were back in graduate school, back in the Pleistocene age, people did think that Gnosticism was a pre-Christian set of religions, but Gnosticism today is normally understood to be a second-century phenomenon, that it didn't predate Paul, and so nobody talks about Gnosticism as a predecessor of Paul because these texts that we have post-date Paul. The Nag Hammadi library is all second-century stuff, so I don't think you can use second-century texts in order to show that this is the background to letters written in the 50s. So my time is up. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, I tend to go with Bultmann and Reitzenstein and others. Their arguments persuade me that it was, and Schmidt's, that these things were pre-Christian and non-Christian.
In the 1950s, that's what they thought, but they don't.
We have now started Dr. Price's 10 minutes.
I mentioned earlier that there are events in the Gospels that historians tend to think contain a historical kernel. And one of them, for example, is the baptism, as you know. I mean, a lot of people think that Jesus really was baptized by John the Baptist. And so I was rereading your book on the Christ myth theory and its problems. And you go through the Gospels to try to show that the events in the Gospels, in fact, probably are not historical, not referring to a historical figure. And so on the baptism, your view is that the baptism of Jesus, where he is baptized and the heavens split open, the dove descends upon him, he hears a voice from heaven. Your view is that this is not based on anything that happened, that it's derived from the Zoroastrian traditions about Zoroaster, who was the son of a Vedic priest. He immerses himself in a river, and when he comes up, the archangel Vohumana appears to him, and to bear him tidings from the one god Ahura Mazda, after which the evil one Ahriman tempts him to abandon this call. And so I'm finding this a little puzzling. Why is it more probable that this account is based on a Zoroastrian text that has to do with Vedic priests and Vohumana and Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, instead of being based on something that of some person being baptized by John the Baptist? We know that there was a John the Baptist. Josephus talks about him. We know that he was baptizing Jews. Jesus was a Jew living at the time, so there's nothing implausible about Jesus being baptized by John, but it seems to be implausible to me that Mark is being influenced by Zoroastrian texts.
There's nothing implausible about that. Judaism, as it existed among the Pharisees, was heavily borrowed from Zoroastrianism.
Mark was not Jewish.
What, Mark is not?
Mark is not Jewish.
Well, if he certainly is basing it on what he understands to be Judaism.
He shows no evidence of knowing anything about Zoroastrianism.
Well, it's all over first century Judaism.
He's not a Jew.
Mark wasn't. I agree, but yeah. Was he not entitled to use the Old Testament either? Because
no, he did use the Old Testament. That's my point. He uses things like the Old Testament, but he doesn't use Zoroastrian sacred texts.
Yeah, but that was built into Judaism at the time. In fact, T.W. Manson argued that Pharisee originally meant Parsi because the Sadducees said, you guys have accepted all these beliefs from our Persian overlords. You're not real Jews, you're Parsis.
1 minute. Okay, I've just got 1 minute.